Well, thanks so much for having me here. As Carol already mentioned, my name is Perrine Monnet, and I'm with the Ballot Policy Center. And we are a statewide policy research and advocacy organization. And as Carol mentioned, we primarily focus on advancing economic mobility for every Coloradan. And that can be very broad and mean a lot of things, economic mobility. And so we have sort of categorized them or organized our work into these four main buckets. One being that we have sustainable and adequate public funding for systems of economic mobility. So thinking about things like K through 12 education, that is adequately funded, as we know that that's an important part of advancing economic mobility. The second being strengthening the care economy. So that's care across the lifespan, thinking about both early childhood education all the way to care for older adults and people with disabilities. And so that's thinking about that people have access to affordable, quality care, but also thinking about the caregivers themselves, the workforce, and that they are supported in doing so. And then the last two are a bit broader, thinking about addressing equity gaps or closing equity gaps in systems of economic mobility like housing, consumer protection work is something that we work a lot on, as well as education and workforce development. And then the last one is telling the economic story, but specifically telling the economic story through the lens of tax fairness, racial equity, and of course, economic mobility. So that's just a little bit more background on the Bell, but today we're talking about wealth and income inequality in Colorado. And just to start, get on the same page about what we mean by wealth, why it matters, why this is something we care about for economic mobility. And so wealth is beyond income, and really thinking about earnings that someone might get from assets. So thinking about savings account, retirement account, if you have a home, a car, all of those things add value to, or add to your wealth, and then subtract any sort of debt that a person may own. So the reason that we care about wealth is that it obviously is important for a person's economic security. It allows people to withstand financial bumps in the road, or if there are any unexpected costs that come up. And then importantly, it allows people to plan and invest in their future. And so we care that people have a robust financial security for their lives. And when that is distributed unequally, there's research that shows that it actually limits consumption, and it limits the greater economy, as well as, of course, limiting opportunity for individuals with lower wealth. And just to set a little bit of the context, we're just quickly go over some national trends of wealth inequality. Wealth inequality in the US is growing. We did have some improvements during COVID-19 when we had stimulus checks, for example. There was the expansion of the child tax credit federally that helped reduce poverty. So we started to see some gains where we started to see some of that gap sort of decrease. And then in 2022, when we had the pandemic support expire, we had increasing inflation, sort of a high cost of living. We saw some of those improvements start to disappear again. And so overall, we are still seeing wealth inequality growing in the US. And importantly, it looks very different depending on race, which you can see in this graph here, that in 2022, a white family's average wealth was 6 times the average wealth of either Black or Hispanic households. And just nationally, again in 2024, the top 10% of households held 67% of wealth. So I'll repeat that again. The top 10% of households across the country held 67% of total wealth in the country. So what does that mean for Colorado? What does that look like, and where does Colorado stand in this larger context? And I will say that state-level disaggregated data on all of the components of wealth are not very accessible and hard to find. but we do have data on total income. So we look a lot at the income data to sort of help us tell the story of wealth inequality, as that's one main component. So when we say total income, we are looking at, again, not just earnings or wages, but also looking at interest from assets that people may own, dividends, capital gains, etc. And based on that data that we have, that I'll get into in just a moment, it is very likely that Colorado is sort of experiencing those similar trends of the nation with growing wealth inequality, and we see that concentrated geographically as well as in likely concentrated racially as well. So moving on, this graph shows the share of income among earners here in Colorado. So this is 2020 data from the Colorado Department of Revenue. And basically it shows here that the top 1% of earners here in Colorado actually sort of like own or take home 20% of income in Colorado. And if you look at that in sort of a broader bracket, the top 20% of Coloradans are taking home over 60% of all income that's generated here in Colorado. And to sort of help put this into different context or more context, the top 1% in 2020, their average sort of adjusted gross income, that's their taxable income, is at about $1.7 million annually. And the remaining 99% is about $71,000. So quite a big gap in sort of annual income that folks are taking home. The top 1% at over $1 million, almost $2 million, and the remainder of Coloradans earning at around $71,000 a year. And because we're looking at income as one of our main contributors, or one of our main sources to understand wealth inequality in Colorado, it's also important to understand sort of the different sources of that income. And so you can see here, this is 2022 data. As you get to those higher earners, sort of higher households with more wealth, you see that the amount of income coming from wages decreases. That's the bar on the right-hand side there. You see that dark brown drops quite notably compared to the left side of the graph. The dark brown bars, which represent wages, are much higher. So for households with lower amounts of wealth, we are more reliant on our wages, whereas you get to the wealthier households and income starts coming more from capital gains, interest, dividends, as well as business or self-employment. So earnings in a slightly different capacity. And I think, someone had mentioned this in an email prior to me joining you all today, that it sounds like in Chaffee County, there are a lot of higher income households moving to Chaffee County. And that's, of course, that can bump up the cost of living. It makes the area median income increase. And when we think about sort of the affordable housing, or the costs of living in Chaffee County as that increases, the lower households who are more reliant on wages, of course, will be more impacted by that if wages are not keeping up with that cost of living. And so we have seen some growth in wages, but we know that it has not been to the extent or kept up with how much the cost of living has increased in Colorado. And so because assets are a growing source of wealth and where folks are getting their income, particularly at that higher end, we took a look at some data on where in Colorado people were earning income from their assets and where that asset ownership is. And this comes from the Economic Innovation Group. They did a county level data analysis across the country. And Colorado is just second behind Wyoming with the largest gap in sort of income from assets. So you see that on the far, we're at the very top there. We have some counties with really, really high earnings from their assets, and that gap with sort of really low earnings from assets. And that's largely driven by the mountain communities. Pitkin County has the highest per capita income from assets at about $98,000 a year. Crowley County being the lowest, with $4,000 a year coming from assets. So it's pretty notable that across the country, Colorado sort of has one of the biggest gaps in earnings and sort of asset ownership. And so this next slide.
Where was Chaffee on that? I can't see it.
Here's Chaffee County highlighted.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No, on the previous one.
Oh, this is by state. Yeah, so Colorado is at the top there, just behind Wyoming. And then this one here has just Colorado and all of our counties. Chaffee County is highlighted and is actually sort of in the middle of the pack. Now this does not necessarily highlight any inequality that we might see within counties, but rather I think it sort of tells a story about where the assets are concentrated geographically, where that value is being really generated. So we can see obviously that those mountain communities there have higher income coming from assets, and sort of especially our rural areas in the southeast, really low income from assets. So nationally, this data found that the bottom 15 counties, again across the country, were majority non-white, had lower educational, post-secondary educational attainment rates, and we generally see this same trend here in Colorado, although like Eagle County, for example, and some of those mountain communities do have a notable like Hispanic population, for example. But we do see, particularly again in the southeast part of the state, where we see really low income coming from assets, is largely or has larger Hispanic populations than the rest of the state.
And a point, can I ask, is maybe noteworthy about Lake County, because we're so close and connected to Leadville, it's just kind of noteworthy that Lake is white.
Yeah, that is a great point. Especially if there's sort of a lot of, like, are there commuters, maybe for,
Yeah, they're all
like,
commuters, they're all, yeah, no one, or, not everyone.
And so one quick piece, we won't spend a ton of time here because we don't have a ton of like data on this again at the state level, but we know that assets, of course, as we just saw, are really important to that wealth generation, and is a really big piece in that intergenerational wealth, which really leads to more of that concentration of wealth. So not only does it boost annual income, right, if you have these assets where you're earning interest every year, but generally, they have the potential at least to increase in value over time. The idea is that their value grows over time, and it continues to sort of grow in value as it increases your wealth and your income. And then importantly, it is often passed down to other generations. And so we see that concentration of wealth from sort of this idea of intergenerational wealth as well. And it is more likely those who inherit wealth are more likely to be wealthy to begin with. So we really see that concentration continued through this sort of aspect.
Could you give us a broad stroke of major assets? Is it home? Is it businesses? Is it investments? Are those the top three?
Yeah, I would say homeownership is definitely a huge driver of wealth. And then I would say like benefits are often, like if you think about having a retirement plan and like retirement savings, that you have a savings account is not necessarily a benefit, but thinking about those savings accounts, retirement plans, things like that are really important as well for wealth generation. But I would say homeownership, and then some of those like investments, as you mentioned, sort of thinking about business investments where you might earn, quite a bit of income from those. any other questions before I move on?
I,
Yeah.
so when you look at this assets,
Mm-hmm.
taxing those assets is a big deal of government funding.
Mm-hmm.
So have you guys looked at that?
Is that the next slide?
We will get, I was going to say, we will get there.
Can you repeat the question? I couldn't hear.
Yeah, the question was about assets, if they're such a big deal, sort of about increasing wealth or sort of this revenue raising, if we've thought about taxing those assets. And I said we will get there. So I will talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But I saw another hand potentially.
If you can wait to hold your
Hold-
questions,
okay.
we'll give you a mic at the end.
Oh, great.
Thank you.
Yeah. So tax policy's role in wealth accumulation and inequality. So tax policy can both exacerbate the inequality that we see as they're able, depending on the tax code, they may be able to keep more of that wealth, or it can aid in sort of the redistribution of this wealth. Overall, I will say that according to the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, Colorado overall has a regressive tax code, a regressive tax policy. And the main sort of aspects of our tax policy that make it that way is that we have a flat income tax rate. So everyone in Colorado, whether you make $30,000 a year or over $1 million a year, is taxed at 4.4%. And so that is one main sort of regressive aspect of our tax code. Partially due to that, having a flat tax rate, we have a high reliance compared to other states on things like sales taxes, which are also generally more regressive, as typically a lower income family will be more burdened by sales taxes than a higher income earning family, for example. And then, so things like capital gains, for example, in Colorado, is also taxed at the same rate as income. It is not considered any different than someone's, general income, annual income that they are being taxed at. And the reason that I highlight that specifically is just because we have seen other states that do tax capital gains separately or at a different rate than their other income. However, we don't want to forget about some of the progressive aspects of our tax policy that are really important for families. So in Colorado at the state level, we have a fully refundable earned income tax credit as well as a fully refundable child tax credit, which are really important for working low-income families, families with children who need extra support. So those have been really important and progressive pieces of our tax policy that have helped at least in some of that redistribution of wealth. So again, as I mentioned, overall we do see a regressive tax code, and this graph really shows, again, those bracket of earners. On the far right side, the top 1% of earners who are earning over $850,000 a year actually see a smaller share of their income going to state and local taxes than our lowest earners and sort of more middle income earners at about 7%. And again, that is a mix of both our state level taxes, but also local taxes where we see a lot of those sales taxes coming from. So one option, one sort of path forward that we are looking at the Bell Policy Center, along with many other partner organizations, one of which being the Colorado Fiscal Institute, which it sounds like you'll hear from in the future, are working on a graduated income tax. And what that means is that it would, as your income rises, your tax rate would increase as well. So instead of our flat tax rate, instead of everyone being taxed at the same rate, higher earners would have a higher tax rate. And importantly, what this would allow the state to do is to, one, raise revenue, right, for important programs. In the past couple of years at the state level, we have had to make cuts to our state budget multiple times, and then we had federal changes, which caused more cuts to our budget. And so we see a really large need to continue funding important programs like, education, childcare, healthcare, and the Medicaid costs. And so this would sort of be a way to raise the revenue that we need in a more equitable way and fund the programs that we know are so important for economic mobility. So the coalition itself is called Protect Colorado's Future. That is a coalition of 12 organizations, I believe. It is growing. I could be, wrong. That number might change. But basically, the proposal, it would be on our 2026 ballots. It would increase taxes for those that are making more than $500,000 a year. That's 2% of Coloradans. And the other 98% of Coloradans would see a decrease in their taxes. It would be marginal, but it would be a decrease nonetheless. And it's estimated to raise about $2 to $3 billion that would go to education, healthcare, childcare, and other sort of state priorities. Again, it sounds like the Colorado Fiscal Institute will come talk about TABOR, but TABOR, or the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, if you're not familiar, is a part of our Constitution and actually explicitly prohibits a graduated income tax. It says that we cannot have that. So this ballot measure would take that language out of our Constitution and implement a graduated income tax. And I think, one last thing that I'll mention here is that generally speaking in Colorado, we've seen over the past many sort of years, we've seen lower unemployment rates, steady job growth, generally by some economic indicators that Colorado's economy is doing pretty well. And yet we see 1 in 5 Coloradans on Medicaid. We have over 600,000 Coloradans receiving SNAP benefits. And we know that in the state of Colorado, we do have incredible amounts of wealth, and that if we could be able to raise revenue and adequately fund these programs and support all Coloradans in sort of achieving upward economic mobility, that is something that we really value at the Bell Policy Center. And so on the next slide, and I can share these slides afterwards, I'll make sure they get sent, but I just included some resources here. There's a fact sheet if you want to learn more specific details about the ballot measure that would be in 2026, and some other resources just sort of on the polling and the research that this coalition went through and talking to voters across the state to understand what their views were on taxation and what needed to be funded, what programs do people care about, and then some other opportunities to either sign up to volunteer if you're interested or just learn more information. We have a wealth of resources on our website, both on TABOR, on our state budget, on economic inequality. And so please feel free as well to also reach out. That's my email up on the screen. Again, I'm happy to send these slides, as well as some other information if you want to get in touch with us. And feel free to ask any questions. I know that was a lot of information. Yeah. Oh, do you want to wait for the mic? Maybe just 1 minute. Do you want this?
We should have another mic.
Okay. I can also work on repeating if we don't get it right.
What in general is the result of the polling that you did?
Yeah, while we're getting the mic sorted, I'll repeat the question. Was just what is the result in general that we saw from the polling? And generally, people are very supportive of a graduated income tax. People do believe that working families are paying too much in taxes and not really seeing the benefits of these programs. And so really, there is general support in making sure that those with making more than $500,000 a year, that they tested, I believe, various income levels. And those making over $500,000 a year, if they are taxed more to fund our important programs, and we see that reduction in taxes for working families, people are really supportive of that across the state of Colorado. Yeah.
I think all of us know that if you use the words eliminate Tabor,
Yes.
it will never pass. How are you guys feeling wording it this way that it will pass?
Yeah, I'll repeat that again. So, as you mentioned, we are very aware so that people, if we say eliminate Tabor, that will, I'm forgetting the words you used, but
That's a no vote.
that's a no vote. And we are very aware of that. We know, people like to vote on their taxes. People like to have that control on whether or not we increase taxes. And that is something that I think we are not trying to get rid of. This is really thinking about year after year now for the past couple years, we have had to make really tough cuts to our state budget, to programs that are important. It's not like, people talk about it like trimming the fat, and we really don't have a ton of fat in our budget at the state level. And so what this is really trying to do is not get rid of Tabor, rather, of course, change a piece of Tabor, but to raise revenue, really thinking about taxing the wealthy so that they pay their fair share so that we can have adequately funded programs that everyone cares about, that we can all agree on, that K through 12 education is important, that access to early childhood education for the youngest children in Colorado is really important, that families can access that affordably. And so that's, I think, definitely something that we want to be vocal about, is that this is not eliminating Tabor by any stretch of the imagination. There are lots of other pieces.
Thank you for being here, and I want to just point to something that I really appreciate and value about what you're talking about, which is you're referring to it as wealth. Mm-hmm. And anybody that's in the financial world refers to that as net worth. And so the people in our community all have worth beyond wealth. Yeah. And so I really appreciate your sticking totally to the word wealth and not net worth. But my question is, on the taxes and 98%,
yeah,
what would that come from? Wages? From any asset? What's your vision for that?
So you're referring to the proposed ballot measure?
Correct.
Yeah. So that would be like your taxable income. And so that does include, that's like your adjusted gross income. So that does include your capital gains interest that you've earned like from a savings account. That would be included as it is currently. So we're not changing sort of how your income or what parts of your income are taxed, rather just changing the rates. So it would be the same, just the 98% of Coloradans that are earning below $500,000 would see that tax rate drop from 4.4% to, I believe it's to 4.2%, but I could be wrong about that. But they would just see, it's not the kind of income that changes, it's just that the rate would be decreased.
Yeah, I have a question. Since you are a data-based organization, has anybody ever sat down and really looked at how much it would cost each of us if we did go to a single-payer system? Thinking with healthcare.
Yeah.
Because it may not be as bad as people think.
Right.
With all the money that we waste in our very confusing health delivery system that we have, which is terrible. Mm-hmm. But we're the only developed country that doesn't have that as an option. And I think we really need to start looking towards that because it could be a savings to us more than not.
I'm writing it down so I don't forget.
So I can speak to that.
Carol.
So I'm on the League's Legislative Action Committee. And 2 years ago in 2023, there was a House bill that was introduced to do a study through the Colorado Department of Health to see what would be the savings if you went to a single payer plan in Colorado. and that got to the Senate and never got voted on, so it didn't go anywhere. Last year in 2024, there was a Senate Bill 045, that did pass, but it passed without any funding. So currently they are trying to raise $750,000 to do this analysis through the Colorado Department of Health. There are multiple national and state organizations that are trying to look at a single payer plan for Colorado. It's not dead, but the funds are about half raised right now. So that is where it is. There are physicians for a single payer plan. I'm one of those. And there are other entities that are looking at the national level on how that can be proposed in Congress. So does that help?
Well, it does. I was just hoping that somebody would say,
This much.
you know, are you willing to put $2,000 more a year as a family into the system?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then not have to deal with everything that we're dealing
Yeah,
with.
what they're looking at are different permutations. If you, I don't know the website, but this has already been evaluated. It was evaluated, I think, about 2019, 2020. I'm not certain of that time frame. But I do know that they felt if Colorado went to a single payer plan, which is that Colorado paid the premiums, and they incorporated Medicare and Medicaid, they proposed that they would save $1 to $2 billion. That study's already been done. You can Google it and find out what those things are. But they wanted to dive deeper into that process. On the negative side, this could bankrupt Colorado, because one of the things that none of us, I could get on my own, I won't do that, but one of the things that we do not understand as a country, we will not understand, is that we have prepaid health care that is twice as expensive as any other country. So if you want savings in your health care, you're going to have to figure out not just the insurance part of it, you're going to have to figure out how you can get the healthcare industry to lower the cost that they charge each and every one of us in the room.
I will just add also, so we have a lot of partners who do a lot of that healthcare work, and so we do not have a ton of data ourselves as an organization on that, but I do think that some of our state level, so like the Colorado Consumer Health Initiative, they do a lot of work in that area, and they may have some numbers. I wrote it down, so I'll see if I can track anything down and find that for you, because I think it likely does exist. And I think especially thinking about, to your point, sort of like the long-term savings that would also include. So I don't have that data for you right now, but I'm happy to follow up, and I think we have some other organizations that do really look at that.
Joanne and Jim?
Yes, since the largest percentile of lower income people earn their wealth from wages, what about minimum wage?
Yes.
And also, what about servers who, with tips and their restaurant owners are not paying them or giving them benefits, which they should be doing? And okay, so we all have to pay a little bit more for eating out, but the system in this country is horrendous, and it's unlike any other peer country that I've ever been to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wages, absolutely, that is a good point, and I think that increasing the minimum wage is something that the Bell certainly supports, especially, again, thinking about having folks able to have like a self-sufficient wage is often what we refer to, or a living wage. And I think that is an important component. As we see like inflation and the cost of living increase so rapidly, we know that wages need to increase, and I think that happens a little bit slower. That's a slower process to sort of bring the wages up, but is absolutely something that would help. I think as we look at this, though, we see that assets are such a driver of wealth that in addition to wages, I think it would also be important to be thinking about how do we increase sort of access to like credit or asset building programs, and how do we, benefits being an important part of that. And so I think it's a little bit of both of all of it.
And affordability housing.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Owning a home.
Yeah, and home ownership, exactly, like home ownership programs, home, like down payment assistance. I think looking into those pathways of home ownership is certainly included in that sort of asset building programs that we think about.
Jim?
Now I've got two questions. The legislative committee that does the research on deals, they've already thrown out one of the progressive tax proposals that they were trying to get signed, because with the limit of one item, and because it goes into Tabor, how are y'all going to get around that? Because that's going to be a very difficult ride to get in front of the committee.
So that's a great question. I was wondering if someone was going to ask that. You're in the know. Yes, so we did file a handful of measures that it goes through a process where it goes through review and you can sort of get feedback before it goes through the title board hearing, and it can also be challenged throughout this process. And the proposals that we had filed were sort of killed under the single subject, and it was actually, we sort of anticipated that things like this would happen, and that's why we started the process early, and it was a small language fix that we will do that does not actually change sort of the strategy or change the measure in any important way, but is a language that we needed to add back in from sort of the Tabor piece in the Constitution, but again does not substantially actually change sort of the measure or our strategy, again because we sort of anticipated that something like this could potentially happen. So we will refile again in December with that change, so that we are in line with the single subject rule, and we'll continue moving forward from there. And again, we'll file sort of multiple versions of that so that we're not tied to just the one sort of measure that we propose. So if something does happen, we have multiple avenues, and ideally are collecting signatures by around February.
And then the second question, there's going to be a lot of ballot measures for 2026, and what I have been seeing, there are different economic trends that I follow. And there's one economic trend that I'm quite aware about, that the price of recycled material is now 20% below what it was when we went into 2008. And some economists say that probably by the time the next election comes, the general election comes up, we are going to be in one financial disaster. So I mean, and I've seen other economic indicators that are telling me the same thing. And I have.
What's the question?
This question: where are y'all going to come if this whole thing collapses on us?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I'm not aware of the specific economic trends that you are looking at. I'd be happy to, if you want to send them and share them, and I'd be happy to share that with my team. So I'm speaking more in general terms because I don't know exactly what you're referring to, but I would say that generally speaking, the wealthiest sort of households in Colorado are the ones that are able to withstand those sorts of sort of economic recessions, right? And so I think our thought here is that because 98% of Coloradans are not going to necessarily, they're not seeing an increase in their taxes. That's not what we're trying to do. And in fact, the revenue that we're trying to raise will go to those programs that will become ever more important in an economic recession, like education, healthcare, childcare, earned income tax credits, the family affordability tax credits, and those sorts of things. So I think that this really puts us in a position with the state budget to actually support the programs that our families will be reliant on when an economic recession occurs. But I'd be happy, I'll again share my email, and if you want to share any of that, I mean, we'd be happy to the more information, the better. Hi.
I know that Tabor really complicates things, and I'm wondering, even if you could get the graduated income tax through, are there other aspects of Tabor that would also have to be changed in order to fund these programs the way you'd like to?
So I am not a Tabor expert. CFI, when they come talk to you all, I'm sure will be able to give you maybe some more precise things. But part of Tabor is that it sets a cap on how much our government can grow. So of course, if we raise, so much revenue that's above the Tabor cap, we haven't really done anything. So a part of this, I think, would also be to what's called like de-Bruce that money, so that the amount of money that we actually collect can be spent and invested in those things. So there are definitely some intricacies in there, and a lot of different rules around Tabor that come into play. But so, yeah, good question.
Will the ballot measure actually list or give some indication of what the new tax rates will be?
Yes. So I don't know if you all saw actually in the Blue Book, this, and on our ballots actually, for the statewide measure Prop MM, there was a little table at the bottom that showed what that tax increase would look like and for who, and so that should be on the same, similarly that should be on this ballot question. And if you go to whether our website or through this link that I'll share out later, the fact sheet, it actually lays out the table of different income brackets and what exactly that tax rate change will likely look like. It's not, again, we're still in this proposal phase where it's going through the hearings and everything, so they could slightly change, but gives you a pretty good idea of where the tax rates might be headed, which Coloradans will be impacted by that and by how much.
You made the comment that you didn't know much about the Tabor Amendment. I would guess that the majority of, probably 99% of this group, doesn't know it either, nor do 99%
Yes,
of
true.
the citizens
You're
of
right.
Colorado. It would seem to me that it would be worth the investment to educate the people to understand the basics of it.
Absolutely.
What do you think?
Yes.
February is the Colorado Fiscal Institute coming to talk about Tabor. And while I have this, Perrine is going to send us the PowerPoint. So if you couldn't see the numbers here, you don't have to belong to the league. You just go to our website, click videos, and this will be videoed, but then there'll be her separate PowerPoint, which some people like to go through a little more quickly.
I think that's wonderful, but we need to do that in every category, in every city, and
Yeah.
in every county. This state is hoodwinked in the word Tabor.
Absolutely.
The
And
idiot who brought it to Colorado.
Tabor is in fact a very contrived, complicated tax policy. It's got a lot of pieces in it. And maybe what I'll do before I send the slides, I'll add, we have a lot of Tabor resources on our website, and I'll add them here if folks want to read them, share them, send them with people. We have a lot of great explainers on what Tabor does and what it means for our economy and our budget.
Other questions?
I don't. This isn't a question, and I apologize ahead of time. There is a book that I recently read called The People's Hospital, and it was written by a doctor who works at Ben Taub in Houston, which is the largest, what do they call that, urgent care treating the medically indigent in the country. And it will give you the most enlightening view of our healthcare system. So his number one statement is, healthcare should not be for profit. I recommend the book.
I'll also just say, if you go to our website, you could join our newsletter, which I'm realizing it also isn't on this page. Maybe I'll add that. But if you go to our website and sign up for our newsletter, we are currently in the process. We'll have a series of reports coming out, and we've had a few already, but really looking at what the budget cuts mean, specifically from HR1 and Medicaid, from the federal level, what does that mean for our rural communities in Colorado, and looking at those long-term impacts. So we'll have a lot of really great resources, information upcoming as well on that.
You talked a little bit about minimum wage, and I think most of us in our age bracket, we all have kids or young adults or old adults who, if they're making minimum wage, you can't survive on minimum wage. Two people in a family can't survive on minimum wage. So where do we go with that fact?
Yeah, and I think that point also just highlights, going back to this slide, we can't even keep up with the cost of living, so how do we start saving? We can't think about savings or investments or home ownership, which are the main sort of drivers. And so I think, where do we go? That's a great question. I think that we have a lot of work, policy-wise and advocacy-wise, especially at the local level, thinking about wages and minimum wages, and what we can do to get there, as well as provide benefits. So I think that's a great point.
I want you all to be very proud. Rusty, go ahead.
Just a quick one, and then another question. The $2 to $3 billion, is that annually, or?
Yes.
Is that annually? And just a note on the rest of that statement after the $2 to $3 billion. Colorado's educated. They want to know where those tax dollars are going. Education, great. Healthcare, great. Childcare, great.
Yeah.
Other state priorities? Concerns about our representation.
Yeah, no, I think that's a totally fair point. And what I will say is that the other state priorities is because we are still going through the process. We don't know exactly what will be listed, if there will be other additional ones. As before we have a final ballot measure, other state priorities encapsulates it. But I think something that came up in our polling was that people want to know, exactly your point, people want to know where the money is going. There is not an abundance of trust necessarily in state government, and so I think we are absolutely aware of that, and so we are thinking about listing sort of where the money will go, or having some sort of like plan about where the money will go. So I hear your point.
Clay? Somebody? Sorry, Nancy.
That's okay.
I got here late and you may have covered this, but what are the names of the industry or the businesses, and how much are they paying their people? In other words, the low-income people are struggling. What are the businesses and the industries that are contributing to that?
Yeah, I don't have an answer for you. I don't know. I mean, it really varies. It varies so much depending on where you are in the state. It varies, like you're mentioning, about what kind of job you have. So I don't know, who exactly or how much, but we know, I mean, even in our childcare workers, for example, again, it varies depending on where you are in the state, but they're earning around like $17 an hour, and they're taking care of our youngest minds, doing really hard work, and are earning $17 an hour. We know that our other, like, home care workers, people who are providing care to older adults in their homes, are also making around $15 to $17 an hour. And so it's across industries. It's from, different sort of businesses and types of jobs, and it just varies greatly. So I don't have a super clear answer to that question.
The last price I saw for Colorado for the average wage across the whole deal was $33 an hour.
Is $33 is the...
That's everybody, from top to bottom, $33 an hour.
I'll come. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, we were fortunate enough a few weeks ago to have a presentation on public lands and the preservation of public lands. And there's video on the Chaffey County website, the voters on it. But I think you should be aware of it, because the rate of return, the return on public lands worth is really quite impressive.
what did you say sorry, would you repeat the name of the?
It's on our video, and it just
Oh, okay.
has a thing on public lands.
Okay.
Last one there right now to you.
I wonder if you've ever consulted that living wage calculator from is it MIT?
Oh, there's a few out there. I thought you were referring maybe to like the University of Washington.
No,
and
it was a different one. But anyway, I looked at it a couple of years ago because I thought it was fascinating, and it was, you know, the amount per like a single adult, two adults with children. And that would be an interesting slide to include in your presentation. I think at the time I had to make $32 an hour in order to live here. It's county, like in JP County.
Yeah, I think we have a similar, like the Colorado Center on Law and Policy, CCLP, partners with the University of Washington, and they do one as well. I think there are multiple sources out there that do this in different versions that look at different family types. If you have kids, how young the kids are, and how much you would need to make to live in different counties.
That like per month, what you have to make
is really high.
I think those figures are on maybe the Chaffey Housing Trust has some of those, or through Chaffey County because they went through a lot of those there. This is a very difficult issue. Okay, Matt, you're good.
So, I mean, yeah, the question a few questions ago about who it is that's making all the money, and we can be certain that we don't know exactly who they are or how much they're making, but they're certainly probably investing heavily in lobbyists that are probably big fans of Tabor. And so, and is there anything on the state level that can start to limit the amounts of lobby power of these special interests? You know, because I mean, it's starting to kind of like take form a little bit on the federal level. Like Citizens United is starting to enter a little bit more of the mainstream consciousness. I'm wondering just on the state if that's a dialogue that you guys are having.
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, like there are definitely a lot of special interests, and that power can go a long way, even at our state level and advocacy. We are not a part of any of those conversations that I'm aware of. I'm sure that there are organizations that are thinking about that at the state level. We have a lot of really advocacy-focused organizations that may have a little more information on that, but I'm not totally sure. Yeah.
Anything else? Again, this is a hard topic. February and Tabor will be a hard topic. So you should be very proud of yourselves for coming out to try to learn a little bit more. And there's a lot of League members here, but 14 people do not belong to the League of Women Voters. So welcome as guests. Thank you. And there's info on how to join back there, if you'd like. And this was a very excellent presentation. And thank you, Linda, for the technology.
Thank you all.
Thank you. So find somebody you don't know, introduce yourselves.